I always thought Thomas and I had the perfect marriage. 12 years, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Portland, and careers we both loved. We'd met in college, built a life together, and I truly believed we were happy. Then came the business. Trips, more frequent, longer, with increasingly vague explanations. The late-night text messages he'd shield from my view, the sudden interest in his appearance. All the classic signs were there, but I refused to see them. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. That is, until the day I found a strand of long blonde hair on his jacket. My hair is dark brown. I could have confronted him immediately. I could have thrown his clothes on the front lawn and changed the locks. But something inside me, perhaps a desire for irrefutable proof or maybe a morbid curiosity about how far he would go, made me choose a different path. I ordered tiny cameras online, disguised as everyday objects. A clock for the bedroom, a smoke detector for the living room, a phone charger for the kitchen. Little did I know that these hidden cameras wouldn't just confirm my suspicions, they would reveal something far more sinister than I could have imagined. Because when Thomas's girlfriend moved into our house under the guise of being a family friend who needed a place to stay, the betrayal I captured wasn't just about their affair. It was about a carefully orchestrated plan that would have destroyed my life completely if I hadn't been watching their every move. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and 6 months ago, my life as I knew it imploded in spectacular fashion. It started with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, finalizing designs for a new client, when Thomas's name flashed across my phone screen. "Hey, Beck," he said, his voice carrying that forced casualness I'd come to recognize when he wanted something. "Remember my colleague Allison, from the Seattle office?" I vaguely recalled him mentioning Allison once or twice. Blonde, marketing department, recently transferred from the New York branch. "She's going through a rough patch," Thomas continued. "Landlord sold her building with almost no notice, and she needs a place to stay while she looks for something new." I was thinking about our guest room. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. This was the same husband who had complained when my college roommate stayed with us for 3 days after her divorce. "How long are we talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Just a couple weeks, a month tops," Thomas assured me. "She's really great, Beck. You'll like her." I hesitated. My instincts were screaming at me to say no, but what reasonable explanation could I give? That I suspected my husband was cheating? That I'd rather not have a beautiful blonde marketing executive sleeping 20 feet from our bedroom? "Sure," I said finally. "When does she need to move in?" "Actually," Thomas paused, "she's kind of here already. I picked her up on my way home from work." Of course she was. When I arrived home that evening, I found Thomas and Allison Cooper laughing. Together in our kitchen, sharing a bottle of the expensive Cabernet I'd been saving for our anniversary. She looked up when I entered, and I immediately understood why Thomas had fallen for her. Tall, willowy, with the kind of effortless beauty that makes other women feel instantly inadequate. "Rebecca!" She rushed forward to embrace me like we were long-lost friends. "Thomas has told me so much about you. I can't thank you enough for letting me stay. I promise I'll be out of your hair as soon as possible." Her perfume was overwhelming, something expensive and French that lingered in the eye, air long after she'd pulled away. "It's no problem," I lied. "The guest room is all yours for as long as you need." Thomas beamed at me, as if I'd just done something wonderful instead of being manipulated into housing his mistress. That night, I lay awake listening to Thomas's steady breathing beside me, my mind racing. Was I being paranoid? Maybe Allison really was just a colleague in need. Maybe the hair I'd found belonged to someone else. Maybe the distance I'd been feeling between us was just my imagination. But at 2:17 a.m., Thomas's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He'd always been a heavy sleeper, so I knew he wouldn't wake. I carefully reached over and checked the notification. It was a text from Allison. "Can't sleep thinking about you. Wish I was in there with you." I placed the phone back exactly where it had been and stared at the ceiling. Now I know. But what was I going to do about it? The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. As soon as Thomas left for the office, I ordered the cameras, 5 in total. I chose models that looked completely ordinary: a digital alarm clock for the bedroom, a smoke detector for the hallway, a picture frame for the living room, a USB wall charger for the kitchen, and a small Bluetooth speaker for the guest room. They weren't cheap, but I used our joint credit card. Let him try to explain those purchases if he noticed. The cameras arrived 2 days later in discreet packaging. I installed them while both Thomas and Allison were at work, testing each one to make sure the angles were right and the Wi-Fi connection was stable. The app on my phone showed 5 perfect feeds from around our house. Now all I had to do was wait. I didn't have to wait long. That very evening, I watched from my office, where I'd claimed to be catching up on work, as Thomas and Allison prepared dinner together. Their body language said everything. The casual touches, the way she leaned into him, how his hand lingered at the small of her back when he passed behind her. "Rebecca will be working late," I heard Thomas say through the kitchen camera's microphone. "She's always buried in her designs." Allison smiled, rising onto her tiptoes to kiss him. Lucky for us. I felt sick watching them in my kitchen, using my cookware, drinking my wine. But I forced myself to keep watching. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. After dinner, they moved to the living room couch, the couch Thomas and I had picked out together after saving for months. I watched them kiss, watched his hands move over her body in ways they hadn't touched mine in longer than I cared to admit. "When are you going to tell her?" Allison asked between kisses. "Soon," Thomas promised. "I'm just waiting for the right moment. These things have to be handled delicately." "The sooner you tell her, the sooner we don't have to sneak around in her own house," Allison replied. "Besides, my lawyer says timing is everything with these situations." "Lawyer? What lawyer?" My stomach twisted. "Don't worry," Thomas said. "Everything's arranged exactly like we discussed. Once the transfer goes through next week, we'll have everything we need." "Transfer? What transfer?" I pulled out my laptop and logged into our joint accounts. Nothing seemed amiss, but then I noticed something strange in our investment portfolio. Thomas had initiated paperwork to liquidate our stocks, nearly $300,000 worth. I switched back to the camera feed just in time to hear Allison say, "And she really has no idea about the offshore account?" Thomas laughed. "Rebecca barely glances at our finances. She trusts me completely." Their conversation continued, revealing a plan so methodical it made my blood run cold. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to empty our accounts, file for divorce while I was blindsided, and ensure I was left with nothing. Thomas had apparently been funneling money into a secret account for months. The business trips had often been consultations, with a cutthroat divorce attorney known for leaving spouses destitute. And Allison? She wasn't just a random colleague. She'd worked with Thomas on this scheme from the beginning, strategically positioning herself in his life, in our home. I sat, frozen at my desk, watching them plan the dismantling of my life with the casual ease of people discussing weekend plans. What hurt most wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing how thoroughly I'd been played. This wasn't a recent development or a moment of weakness. This was calculated, long-term deception. When they finally headed upstairs, to the guest room, their one concession to decency in my presence, I remained motionless, staring at the now empty living room on my screen. I had a decision to make. I could confront them immediately, but that would reveal my only advantage, the cameras they didn't know about. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to be as calculating as they had been. I pulled out a notebook and began to write, detailing everything I'd heard, everything I'd seen. I'd need evidence, leverage, a plan. Thomas and Allison thought they were so clever, moving his girlfriend into our house, plotting right under my nose. But they had no idea what I was capable of. And they certainly had no idea that every word, every touch, every scheme was being recorded, building a case that would be their undoing. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I went through the motions of normal life with an Oscar-worthy performance. I kissed Thomas goodbye, smiled politely at Allison, over coffee, and left for work exactly on schedule. But instead of going to my design studio, I drove straight to First National Bank. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I'd like to speak with someone about securing my accounts, I told the customer service representative. Immediately. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Patricia Danvers, a silver-haired bank manager whose no-nonsense demeanor was exactly what I needed. "So you believe your husband is planning to empty your joint accounts?" she asked, her expression revealing nothing. I nodded. "I have reason to believe a significant transfer will be attempted within the week." She typed something into her computer. "The accounts are joint, Ms. Mitchell. Legally, he has as much right to those funds as you do." "I understand, but there must be something I can do to protect myself." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "There are several options. We can place a temporary hold requiring dual authorization for any transfers over a certain amount. We can also help you establish separate accounts with new security protocols." By the time I left the bank, I had opened a new account in my name only, transferred half of our savings, my legal entitlement, and set up alerts for any activity on the remaining joint accounts. It wasn't foolproof, but it was a start. My next stop was less official. My college roommate's brother, Ethan Taylor, had built a career in digital security after a questionable past as what he euphemistically called a network penetration specialist. In other words, he knew how to hack into things, and he owed me a favor after I'd designed his company's branding for free. "This is seriously messed up, Beck," Ethan said after I explained the situation in his cluttered home office. "You're sure about all this?" "I have it on video," I replied flatly. He whistled low. "Those cameras you installed, they're good for basic surveillance, but if you really want to dig into what they're planning, we need to up your game." For the next 2 hours, Ethan showed me how to access more than just the video feeds from my cameras. Most people don't realize these consumer-grade security devices can be configured to do a lot more, he explained. "We can set up keyword monitoring for conversations, remote access to devices on your home network, and backups that upload automatically to secure cloud storage." "Is that legal?" I asked hesitantly. Ethan gave me a look. "Rebecca, your husband is planning to clean you out and leave you destitute while sleeping with another woman in your guest bedroom. Are you really worried about the letter of the law right now?" He had a point. By late afternoon, my home security system had been transformed into something far more sophisticated. Not only could I watch and listen, but I could also receive alerts. Whenever certain keywords were spoken: account, transfer, lawyer, divorce. Additionally, Ethan had helped me gain access to Thomas's email by recovering a password from our shared laptop at home. "Just remember," Ethan warned as I was leaving, "document everything, but don't let on that you know. The moment they realize you're onto them, they'll accelerate their plans." When I returned home that evening, Thomas and Allison were already there, preparing dinner as if they belonged together in my kitchen. The tableau of domestic bliss might have been convincing if I hadn't known better. "How was your day?" Thomas asked, kissing my cheek with practiced affection. "Productive," I answered truthfully. "Very productive." Over dinner, I noticed how they carefully maintained a professional distance, how their conversations stayed firmly in safe territory. If I hadn't seen them with my own eyes, I might never have suspected. Thomas had always been good at compartmentalizing. It was what made him successful in business negotiations. Now I realized he'd been using that same skill in our marriage. "Allison, how's the apartment hunting going?" I asked innocently, spearing a piece of asparagus with my fork. She looked momentarily startled, as if she'd forgotten that was supposed to be her purpose here. "Oh, well, the market is brutal right now. Everything is either way overpriced or gets snatched up immediately." "That's too bad," I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. "But don't worry about rushing. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Thomas shot me a grateful smile, misinterpreting my generosity. If only he knew that each day they remained under my roof was another day of evidence accumulating on my secure cloud server. After dinner, I excused myself to take a bath, a luxury I rarely indulged in, but which now provided the perfect cover to check the camera feeds on my phone. Sure enough, as soon as they thought I was out of earshot, the act dropped. "She's being so nice about all this," Allison said, loading dishes into the dishwasher. "Almost makes me feel bad." Thomas scoffed. "Don't. Rebecca checked out of this marriage years ago. She's just too comfortable to admit it. Trust me, in the long run, this is better for everyone." The casual way he rewrote our history made my blood boil. I'd supported his career changes, moved cities twice for his promotions, put my own ambitions on hold more than once. And now he was painting me as the disinterested wife to justify his betrayal. "Did you talk to Edward about the transfer?" Allison asked, referring to Thomas's financial advisor. "It's happening Friday," Thomas confirmed. "Once it clears, we'll have 3 days before it could possibly be traced, more than enough time to be settled in Belize." Belize? They were planning to leave the country? And the divorce papers? "Filed next Monday. She'll be served while we're already gone." I nearly dropped my phone in the bathwater. This was happening faster than I'd anticipated. I had 3 days, maybe 4, to stop them. The next morning, I called in sick again, waiting until Thomas and Allison had left for work. Before starting my real mission for the day, I began by thoroughly searching our home, looking for any physical evidence they might have hidden. In Thomas's home office, behind the row of business books he never read but kept for appearances, I found a manila envelope containing duplicate passports, his and Allison's, along with what appeared to be property documents for something in Belize. So that part was real. In the guest room, carefully tucked inside Allison's expensive luggage, I discovered a burner phone and a notebook filled with dates, account numbers, and amounts. The final entry was circled multiple times. Friday, $295K transfer. Below it, in different handwriting that I recognized as Thomas's, "K's Azul Resort. Monday arrival confirmed." I photographed everything, careful to return each item exactly as I'd found it. Then I headed to my next destination, the offices of Harriet Winters, reportedly the most ruthless divorce attorney in Portland. Harriet's office was minimalist and intimidating, much like the woman herself. After hearing my story and reviewing some of the evidence I'd gathered, she leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile spreading across her face. "Mrs. Mitchell, what your husband and his girlfriend are attempting is not just morally reprehensible. Parts of it are actually criminal. Moving marital assets offshore explicitly to hide them during divorce proceedings is fraud. The fact that you have video evidence of them discussing this plan makes our case exceptionally strong." "So what do we do?" I asked. "If this were a standard case, I'd recommend filing immediately for divorce with an emergency motion to freeze all assets," Harriet explained. "But given the sophistication of their plan and the imminent timeline, we need to be more strategic." She outlined a plan that was both elegant and devastating in its simplicity. "Do nothing to tip them off until Friday," she advised. "Let them believe their plan is proceeding perfectly. In the meantime, my team will prepare all the necessary legal filings and coordinate with both the bank and law enforcement. When they attempt to make that transfer, They'll trigger every alarm we've set. I left Harriet's office with a dangerous mixture of emotions: vindication, anticipation, and an unexpected grief for the marriage I had believed in for so long. That evening, maintaining my oblivious facade became increasingly difficult. Each smile from Thomas felt like a slap. Each time Allison spoke about her fictional apartment hunt, I wanted to scream the truth in her face. But I held it together, reminding myself that patience would yield the most complete victory. Later, alone in my home office while monitoring the camera feeds, I watched Thomas and Allison in the guest room. They were celebrating. A bottle of champagne open between them. "In 3 days we'll be sipping these on a beach," Allison giggled, clinking her glass against his. "To new beginnings," Thomas toasted, "and to never have to pretend again." The irony wasn't lost on me. All this time, I thought I had been the one being deceived. But in reality, they were the ones operating under a dangerous illusion. The illusion that they had outsmarted me. Thursday was the hardest day. Every hour dragged as I waited for Friday to arrive. I threw myself into work, completing 2 client projects ahead of schedule simply to occupy my mind. Thomas texted to say he'd be working late, a lie I now knew covered his final meeting with Edward to confirm the transfer details. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake listening to Thomas's breathing beside me, wondering how someone I had shared everything with for 12 years could become such a stranger. Had he always been capable of this level of deception? Or had something changed? Had I missed signs that could have prevented us from reaching this point? By morning, such questions seemed pointless. What mattered now was protecting myself and seeing justice done. Friday dawned bright and clear, mockingly, beautiful for what I knew would be one of the most difficult days of my life. Thomas kissed me goodbye as usual, completely unaware that it would be the last normal moment we would ever share. "I might be home late again," he said casually. "Big project wrapping up?" I nodded. "No problem. I think I'll take Allison out for dinner, sort of a girls' night. She seems like she could use a friend right now." Thomas looked momentarily panicked before masking it with a smile. "That's thoughtful of you. I'm sure she'd appreciate that." As soon as he left, I texted Allison from the kitchen while watching her reaction on the guest room camera. "Thomas is working late. Thought maybe we could grab dinner tonight, just us girls. Get to know each other better." I watched her read the message, then immediately call Thomas. "She wants to have dinner with me tonight," she hissed into the phone. "What am I supposed to do?" "Just go," Thomas replied, his voice tinny through the phone speaker. "It's one dinner. The transfer will be complete by 3 p.m., and by tomorrow night we'll be packed and ready. She suspects nothing." Allison agreed reluctantly and texted me back with an enthusiastic acceptance. At 2:45 p.m., I sat in Harriet's office, watching the clock. Her assistant brought in coffee that neither of us touched. "My contact at the bank confirms they're ready," Harriet said. "The moment the transfer is initiated, we'll be notified." At precisely 3:07 p.m., Harriet's phone rang. She answered, listened, briefly, then gave me a sharp nod. "It's happening." For the next 20 minutes, we waited in tense silence as the trap we'd laid was sprung. At 3:32 p.m., the phone rang again. "Transfer blocked," Harriet reported after hanging up. "And the account is frozen pending investigation. They've also notified the fraud department at the International Bank where your husband attempted to wire the funds. Phase 1 complete. Now for Phase 2. I met Allison at an upscale restaurant downtown at 7 p.m. She looked nervous but was making a valiant attempt to appear relaxed and friendly. "This place is gorgeous," she gushed, looking around at the elegant decor. "Thomas mentioned you have great taste. Did he?" I smiled. Thomas has always appreciated quality things. It's one of the reasons I was surprised by his choice in mistresses. The color drained from Allison's face. What are you? Let's not insult each other's intelligence," I said calmly, opening my phone to show her a still image from the camera feed. Her and Thomas kissing in my kitchen. I know everything. The affair, the offshore account, the plan to leave for Belize on Monday after clearing out our joint assets. Allison's shock quickly transformed into calculation. I could almost see her mind racing, trying to find a way to salvage their plan. "You have no idea what your husband is really like," she said finally, attempting to flip the script. "Thomas has been miserable for years. He tried to transfer nearly $300,000 to an offshore account this afternoon," I interrupted. "Except the transfer was blocked. The accounts are frozen. There will be no romantic getaway to Kay's Azul resort." Now genuine fear crept into her expression. "You're bluffing." I slid a business card across the table. "This is my attorney's contact information. She's already filed emergency motions with the court and has been in touch with the Financial Crimes Division of the Portland Police Department. I have video evidence of you and Thomas explicitly discussing your plan to defraud me." Allison stared at the card, then back at me. "What do you want?" "From you?" "Nothing. You're just a symptom of the real problem. But you might want to contact a lawyer of your own. Conspiracy to commit fraud carries significant penalties in Oregon." I stood, dropping cash on the table to cover my untouched drink. "Oh, and you should probably find somewhere else to stay tonight. I've changed the locks." As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from Harriet. "Police just picked up Thomas at his office. Phase 3 complete." The sense of triumph I'd expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness as I drove home to an empty house that no longer felt like mine, despite being the clear victor in this horrible game. I poured myself a glass of wine and systematically began removing the hidden cameras that had saved me from financial ruin. Each one represented a piece of trust shattered, a fragment of my former life that could never be recovered. The smoke detector camera was the last to come down. As I removed it from the hallway wall, I noticed something tucked into the junction box behind it. A small velvet pouch that definitely hadn't been there when I installed the camera. Inside was a diamond tennis bracelet I'd admired months ago, along with a note in Thomas's handwriting. "For our anniversary next week, 12 years, 12 diamonds, love always." The bitter irony of it, a token of love always hidden in the same house where he'd planned to destroy me, finally broke the emotional dam I'd been maintaining. I sank to the floor, bracelet clutched in my hand, and allowed myself to properly mourn the death of my marriage. Morning found me exhausted but resolute. I'd spent the night alternating between tears and anger, finally reaching a state of clear-eyed determination as the sun rose. Thomas had made his choices. Now I would make mine. I brewed a pot of coffee and opened my laptop, logging into my design firm's website. For years, I'd put my dream of expanding the business on hold, deferring to Thomas's career needs. No more. I began drafting plans for the studio space I'd always wanted, mentally allocating portions of what would soon be my divorce settlement. As I worked, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number with the local area code. "Rebecca Mitchell?" a male voice asked when I answered. "Yes, speaking." "This is Detective Marshall with Portland PD. We need you to come down to the station. There's been a complication with your husband's case." My stomach dropped. "What kind of complication?" The detective hesitated. "Ma'am, I think it's better if we discuss this in person. How soon can you get here?" Whatever Thomas had done now, whatever new scheme he'd concocted, I would face it head on. No more hiding, no more surveillance from the shadows. I was done being the victim in this story. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, already reaching for my car keys. Little did I know, the true nature of Thomas and Allison's plan was about to reveal itself, and the hidden cameras that had exposed their betrayal had only captured the surface of a much darker conspiracy. The Portland Police Department's downtown precinct was busier than I expected for a Saturday morning. Officers led handcuffed individuals through the lobby, while harried-looking administrative staff juggled phone calls and paperwork. I approached the front desk, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "I'm Rebecca Mitchell," Detective Marshall asked me to come in. The desk sergeant made a call, and moments later, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a rumpled suit appeared. "Mrs. Mitchell, Detective James Marshall. Thank you for coming in so quickly. Please follow me." He led me through a security door and down a corridor to a small conference room rather than an interrogation room, which I took as a good sign. Inside, an unfamiliar woman in a dark pantsuit stood as we entered. "This is Special Agent Diane Keller, with the FBI," Detective Marshall introduced her. My anxiety immediately spiked. "FBI? I thought this was about my husband's attempted fraud." Agent Keller gestured for me to sit. "It started that way, Mrs. Mitchell, but we've uncovered evidence, suggesting a much larger operation. When we arrested your husband yesterday, he was in possession of multiple falsified identities, and his computer contained links to several questionable offshore accounts beyond the one you already knew about." I struggled to process this information. "I don't understand. Are you saying Thomas is involved in something bigger than just trying to steal our savings?" "We believe your husband and Allison Cooper are connected to a sophisticated identity theft and money laundering network we've been tracking for nearly 3 years," Detective Marshall explained. "The financial fraud against you appears to be just one small piece of a much larger criminal enterprise." My mind reeled. The Thomas I knew, or thought I knew, was ambitious and sometimes ruthless in business. But this level of criminality seemed inconceivable. "We've obtained a warrant to search your home," Agent Keller continued. "We believe there may be evidence there that could help us dismantle this entire operation." I thought of our house, the space that had once represented our shared dreams, now potentially hiding evidence of criminal activities I couldn't begin to comprehend. "Of course," I agreed. "Whatever you need." "There's something else, Detective," Marshall said, his expression grave. "We haven't been able to locate Allison Cooper. She never returned to your house last night, and she hasn't shown up at any of her known addresses. Given what we know now, we're concerned she may have access to resources we're not aware of." A chill ran down my spine as I recalled our conversation at the restaurant. I'd been so focused on my own vindication that I hadn't considered she might have contingency plans. "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Keller leaned forward, "we'd like to review the footage from your security cameras. The recordings might contain information about their operation that even you wouldn't have recognized as significant." I hesitated. The cameras had been my secret weapon, my private evidence-gathering tool. Surrendering the footage meant acknowledging the full extent of my surveillance to law enforcement. The cameras, they weren't exactly professionally installed, I admitted. I put them in myself after I suspected the affair. "We're not concerned with how they were installed," Agent Keller assured me. "What matters is the evidence they may contain. Given the circumstances, I don't anticipate any legal issues regarding their use." I nodded slowly. "All the footage is backed up to a secure cloud server. I can give you access." For the next 2 hours, I sat in that conference room answering questions about Thomas and Allison, their behaviors, conversations I'd overheard, any visitors to our home, unusual phone calls or packages. I described the documents I'd found hidden in Thomas's office and Allison's luggage, realizing now that the property papers for Belize might have been part of a larger money laundering scheme rather than simply a romantic getaway location. By early afternoon, I was mentally exhausted but determined to cooperate fully. I returned home accompanied by Detective Marshall, Agent Keller, and 2 additional officers with a search warrant. Watching strangers systematically search through my home, opening drawers, examining floorboards, testing walls for hidden compartments, was surreal. I felt disconnected from the space, as if I were watching a crime show rather than witnessing the excavation of my own life. "Mrs. Mitchell," one of the officers called from the guest room, "did you know about this?" I followed his voice to find him pointing at a section of baseboard that had been pulled away from the wall, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a waterproof case containing several passports, none with Thomas's or Allison's photos, but all with different names, along with credit cards to match and several USB drives. "No," I whispered, staring at this physical evidence of Thomas's deception. "I had no idea." Agent Keller carefully extracted the items using gloved hands. "This is consistent with what we've seen from this network. They maintain multiple identities, ready to deploy when needed." In the kitchen, another officer discovered that the false bottom of our coffee canister concealed a burner phone and a small ledger with what appeared to be coded entries. The home office yielded an external hard drive hidden inside a hollowed-out business book. Our bedroom, the most painful to watch being searched, revealed nothing until Agent Keller checked the air vent above Thomas's side of the bed. "Mrs. Mitchell," she called, her tone deliberately neutral. "Do you own a firearm?" My blood ran cold. "No, neither of us do. Thomas always said he didn't feel comfortable having guns in the house." She carefully removed a handgun from the vent, checking to ensure it wasn't loaded before placing it in an evidence bag, registered to someone named Michael Brennan. Another alias, most likely. By evening, the search had yielded more evidence than any of us anticipated. Our home, the place I'd felt safest for years, had been riddled with hidden caches of criminal tools and evidence. I felt violated in a way that transcended even Thomas's infidelity. "We'd like to place you in protective custody," Detective Marshall informed me as the officers finished cataloging the last of the evidence. "Until we apprehend Allison Cooper and determine the full extent of this network, there's a possibility you could be at risk." I thought of my life, my design business, my clients, my friends. Could I really put everything on hold because my husband turned out to be a criminal? "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully, "but I can't just disappear from my own life. I have commitments, responsibilities." "At minimum, we need to relocate you temporarily," Agent Keller insisted. "This house isn't secure. They know every entrance, every blind spot. And now that Thomas is in custody, his associates may be concerned about what you know." I hadn't considered that aspect, that Thomas's criminal connections might see me as a liability. The thought of shadowy figures associated with identity theft and money laundering viewing me as a loose end sent another chill through me. "I have a friend with a vacation property in the mountains," I offered. "No one in Thomas's circle knows about it. I could stay there while you continue the investigation." Agent Keller considered this. "We'll need the address, and we'll want to establish check-in protocols. You'll need to be extremely cautious about electronic communications, no social media, no traceable phone calls, nothing that could give away your location." By midnight, I was driving toward Lauren Williams' cabin near Mount Hood, my car packed with hastily gathered essentials. Lauren had been shocked when I called with my abbreviated explanation that Thomas was involved in criminal activity and I needed somewhere safe to stay. But she'd immediately offered her family's rarely used vacation home. The cabin was rustic, but comfortable, isolated at the end of a private road with sweeping views of the forested mountainside. As I unpacked the few belongings I'd brought, I realized this was the first time in 15 years I was truly on my own. No Thomas, no marriage, no comfortable illusions about my life. I spent Sunday adjusting to my new reality, checking in with Detective Marshall as arranged and trying to wrap my mind around the staggering revelations of the past 48 hours. By Monday morning, I felt steady enough to contact my business partner, Melissa, with a carefully worded explanation that I was dealing with serious personal issues and would be working remotely for a while. "Is everything okay?" Melissa asked, concern evident in her voice. "This isn't like you, Beck." "It will be," I assured her, wishing I could confide the full truth. "I just need some time to sort things out. I can still handle the Peterson and Alvarez accounts from here." "Take whatever time you need," she said. "Just be careful, okay?" You sound different. I was different. The Rebecca who had existed a week ago, trusting, somewhat naive, comfortable in her marriage, was gone. In her place was someone more cautious, more aware of how quickly security could evaporate. On Tuesday morning, Agent Keller called with an update. We're making progress tracking the network. Thomas is cooperating, to a point, trying to negotiate a better deal for himself. Still no sign of Allison Cooper, but we've identified 3 additional members of the operation based on the evidence. From your home. What about the cameras? I asked. Was there anything useful in the footage? Very useful, she confirmed. We've identified several instances where they appear to be discussing aspects of their operation in coded language. There's also a meeting with an unidentified third party in your living room 2 weeks ago that we're particularly interested in. I had no recollection of any visitors during that time, which meant it must have happened while I was at work. The thought of unknown criminals meeting in my home sent another wave of violation through me. There's something else you should know, Agent Keller continued, her tone shifting. The background check we ran on Allison Cooper came back with some concerning results. The identity she's been using is sophisticated. It would pass most standard verification procedures, but when we dug deeper, we discovered inconsistencies. We believe Allison Cooper may be connected to several other identity theft operations across multiple states. Who is she really? I asked. We're still working on that, but based on partial facial recognition matches, we think she may be involved. In a case from Seattle 3 years ago, where a wealthy divorcee was found dead after her accounts were emptied. The prime suspect was the victim's husband's girlfriend, who disappeared immediately after. My mouth went dry. Are you saying she might have killed someone? I'm saying we have reason to believe she's dangerous, Mrs. Mitchell, which is why your continued cooperation and caution is so important. After hanging up, I sat on the cabin's porch, staring at the dense forest surrounding me. The woman who had slept in my guest room, used my shower, and eaten at my table might be a murderer. And she was still out there, potentially aware that I had been the one to expose their plans. For the next several days, I maintained my isolation, working remotely and checking in with Detective Marshall or Agent Keller daily. Each call brought new revelations about Thomas's involvement in the criminal network, offshore accounts in Chihuahua's 7 countries, connections to similar operations in Chicago and Miami, evidence suggesting the group had been active for at least 5 years. What they didn't bring was any news of Allison's whereabouts. On Friday evening, nearly a week after Thomas's arrest, I was preparing dinner when headlights swept across the cabin windows. I froze, knife in hand. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I hadn't shared my location with anyone beyond Lauren, Detective Marshall, and Agent Keller. The car engine cut off. A single car door opened and closed. Footsteps crunched on the gravel driveway, approaching the front porch. I quickly turned off the kitchen light and moved to the window, peering carefully around the edge of the curtain. The porch light illuminated a familiar figure that sent my heart racing. Ethan Taylor, my friend's brother who had helped me enhance my surveillance system. How had he found me? Why was he here? A heavy knock sounded on the front door. Rebecca? It's Ethan. I know you're in there. We need to talk. I remained silent, my mind racing. No one knew I had consulted Ethan about the cameras. I'd never mentioned his name to the police. There was no legitimate way he could have discovered my location. Rebecca, please. It's important. It's about Allison. That decided it. I quietly moved to the bedroom where I'd stashed the burner phone Agent Keller had given me for emergencies. I dialed her direct number. Keller, she answered on the second ring. It's Rebecca, I whispered. Someone found me at the cabin. Ethan Taylor. He's the person who helped me set up the advanced features on my cameras. He's outside right now saying he needs to talk about Allison. Do not open the door, Agent Keller instructed immediately. We have no record of anyone named Ethan Taylor being involved in this case. How would he know where you are? He couldn't, I confirmed, my suspicions crystallizing into certainty. Unless he's connected to them, she finished my thought. Stay on this line. I'm dispatching local officers to your location now. They're about 15 minutes out. Is the cabin secure? Yes. Doors locked, windows latched. Another knock, more insistent this time. Rebecca, I'm trying to help you. Allison knows where you are. She's on her way. We need to get you somewhere safe. It was a clever tactic, creating a false sense of urgency to make me open the door. But how? Had he found me in the first place? Then it hit me. The cloud server where my camera footage was stored, Ethan had helped set it up. If he was working with Allison and Thomas, he would have had access to everything I'd recorded. He would have known about my conversation with Lauren about using the cabin. He might even have been monitoring my communications all along. Agent Keller, I said quietly into the phone. I think he might have been part of their operation from the beginning. The surveillance system he helped me set up, it could have been compromised from the start. Stay away from the windows and doors, she instructed. Officers are en route? Is there a secure room you can lock yourself in? I moved toward the master bedroom, which had the sturdiest door in the cabin. Yes, I'm heading there now. A sudden crash from the kitchen stopped me in my tracks, the back door. He's inside, I whispered into the phone. Coming through the kitchen. Rebecca? Ethan's voice called from the other room. Don't make this difficult. I'm just the messenger. They sent me to bring you in. I slipped into the bedroom and locked the door, then pushed the heavy dresser in front of it for good measure. Outside, I could hear Ethan moving through the cabin, checking rooms systematically. 10 minutes, Rebecca. Agent Keller's voice came through the phone. Officers are speeding. Just hold on. The bedroom doorknob rattled. I know you're in there, Ethan called, his friendly demeanor dropping away. This doesn't have to get messy. Open the door. I backed away, frantically scanning the room for anything I could use as a weapon. The bedside lamp was heavy. I unplugged, it gripping its base like a club. They just want to talk, Ethan continued. Clean up a few loose ends. You understand, right? Business is business. A hard thud hit the door. He was trying to force it open. The dresser scraped slightly across the floor with the impact. 5 minutes, Agent Keller whispered in my ear. Another thud, harder this time. The dresser moved another inch. I retreated to the far corner of the room, lamp raised. You know what's funny? Ethan called between attempts to break down the door. Thomas actually liked you, said it was a shame you had to be involved. But, Allison, she's been looking forward to meeting the real you. No more pretending to be your friend. The next impact splintered the wood around the lock. One more good hit would break through. 2 minutes, Agent Keller promised. But I knew it. Wouldn't be fast enough. The door was giving way. In seconds, Ethan would be inside. As the final blow shattered the doorframe, sending the dresser skidding across the floor, I raised the lamp, preparing for a fight I wasn't sure I could win. Ethan stepped through the doorway, something metallic, glinting in his hand. And then, miraculously, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the night. Ethan froze, his expression shifting from confidence to calculation. Looks like your friends are joining the party, he said, backing toward the door. We'll have to continue this another time. Before I could react, he was gone, his footsteps pounding through the cabin and out the back door. Seconds later, I heard a car engine roar to life and tires spray gravel as he fled. I sank to the floor, still clutching the lamp as the sirens grew louder. Agent Keller's voice came through the phone I'd dropped during the confrontation. Rebecca? Rebecca, are you there? With shaking hands, I retrieved the phone. He's gone. He ran when he heard the sirens. Are you hurt? No, just rattled. Stay where you are. Officers are pulling up now. Sure enough, blue and red lights flashed through the windows as police vehicles surrounded the cabin. Within minutes, Uniformed officers had cleared the building and secured the perimeter. As I gave my statement to the local sheriff's deputy, a troubling realization solidified in my mind. The network Thomas and Allison were part of was more extensive and had deeper resources than any of us had imagined. If Ethan was involved, someone I'd known peripherally for years through my college roommate, how many other seemingly ordinary people might be connected? More importantly, if they had found me once, they could find me again. When Agent Keller arrived an hour later, having driven directly from Portland, her expression confirmed my fears. "We need to move you to a secure location," she said without preamble. "This situation is more volatile than we anticipated." As I gathered my belongings, preparing to disappear even more thoroughly, I couldn't help but wonder how much deeper this rabbit hole went. Thomas's betrayal had been just the surface. Below it lay a network of deception I was only beginning to comprehend. And somewhere out there, Allison, or whatever her real name was still watching, waiting, planning her next move. The hidden cameras that had revealed the first layer of truth had inadvertently pulled me into something far more dangerous than a simple marital betrayal. This was no longer just about saving myself from a fraudulent divorce. Now, it was about surviving, long enough to see justice done. "We call this a safe house," Agent Keller explained as we pulled up to an unremarkable suburban home in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Salem. It's owned through multiple shell companies with no connection to any government agency, on paper. After the confrontation with Ethan at Lauren's cabin, we'd driven for nearly 2 hours, taking a circuitous route to ensure we weren't followed. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. "You'll stay here with round-the-clock protection until we can secure the primary players in this network," she continued, killing the engine. "2 agents will remain on site at all times, and there are security protocols in place for any visitors or deliveries." The house was surprisingly comfortable inside, furnished simply but adequately, with plain curtains drawn across all windows. Agent Keller showed me to a bedroom on the second floor, equipped with basic necessities and a small desk. "Try to get some rest," she advised, though we both knew sleep would be elusive after the night's events. "We'll debrief fully in the morning." Left alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, attempting to process how drastically my life had changed in just over a week. From a successful designer with a seemingly solid marriage to a target in a federal investigation, hiding in a safe house while criminals searched for me. The trajectory was so absurd, it almost seemed like someone else's story. I picked up the framed photograph on the nightstand, a generic landscape, likely chosen for its complete lack of identifying features. It was the opposite of the carefully curated gallery wall Thomas and I had created in our living room, filled with memories from trips and celebrations. I wondered if any of those memories had been real, or if they'd all been part of Thomas's elaborate performance. How long had he been living this double life? Has he ever been the man I thought I married? Exhaustion eventually overcame my racing thoughts, and I drifted into uneasy sleep, still fully dressed on top of the covers. Morning brought the promised debriefing. Agent Keller arrived with fresh coffee and a stack of folders, joining me and the 2 on-site agents, Martinez and Clayton, at the kitchen table. "We've made significant progress overnight," she began, sliding a photo across the table. "This is the real Ethan Taylor." I stared at the DMV photo of a man I'd never seen before, heavier, older, with different colored eyes than the Ethan I knew. Then who? "We believe the man who helped you with your surveillance system and then tried to abduct you is actually Kevin Mercer." She slid another photo forward, a mugshot from several years back that unmistakably showed the man I knew as Ethan, though with shorter hair and a harder expression. He has a record for wire fraud and was suspected in a series of identity theft cases in California, though charges were never filed. I felt physically ill. How did he end up posing as my friend's brother? "That's where this gets even more concerning," Agent Keller said grimly. We spoke with Lauren Williams early this morning. The real Ethan Taylor died in a boating accident 3 years ago. When we showed her a photo of Mercer, she confirmed he began appearing at family functions about 6 months later, claiming to have been traveling abroad previously. The family accepted him because they had been estranged from Ethan for years, before his death, and weren't familiar with his appearance as an adult. The calculated nature of the deception was staggering. So he infiltrated their family just to… what? Wait for an opportunity like this? We believe this network identifies potential targets well in advance, then positions operatives in their social circles, Agent Martinez explained. They gather intelligence, establish trust, and wait for the right circumstances to exploit. Which means Thomas likely targeted me from the beginning, I said flatly, the realization settling like a stone in my stomach. Our entire relationship could have been a setup. The 3 agents exchanged glances. We're still investigating that possibility, Agent Keller said carefully. But based on the timeline we've established, it appears your husband became involved with this network approximately 4 years ago, 8 years into your marriage. It was a small comfort. Even if our early years together had been genuine, the man I'd shared my life with for the past 4 years had been systematically betraying me, using our marriage as cover for criminal activities. What about Allison? I asked. Agent Clayton slid forward another file. We've identified at least 6 aliases she's operated under in the past decade. Her real name appears to be Vanessa Blackwood. She has no criminal record, but has been a person of interest in 3 separate investigations involving wealthy men who were bankrupted through elaborate fraud schemes. The photo showed a younger version of Allison Vanessa with darker hair, but the calculating eyes were unmistakable. And the Seattle case? The murdered woman? Still under investigation, Agent Keller replied, but forensic financial analysis shows striking similarities to the pattern we're seeing with your accounts. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. So, what happens now? Now we use you to draw them out, she stated matter-of-factly. My head snapped up. Excuse me? Not physically, she clarified. Digitally. We believe this network continues to monitor your online presence. If we create the right digital footprint, we can set a trap that will help us locate Blackwood and possibly other key figures. The plan they outlined was both simple and terrifying. I would appear to grow increasingly frustrated with protective custody. Through carefully crafted emails, text messages, and even a few social media posts, I would leave breadcrumbs suggesting I plan to return to Portland to check on my business and collect personal items from my home. We'll control every aspect of the digital trail, Agent Clayton assured me. The goal is to make it appear that you'll be at your house next Tuesday evening, alone and vulnerable. Meanwhile, the house will be under complete surveillance, with tactical teams positioned to apprehend anyone who approaches, Agent Martinez added. And I'll be… here, Agent Keller confirmed. Safe. You won't go anywhere near your house until we've completely dismantled this network. The operation began that afternoon. I sent emails to Melissa about returning to the studio next week. I texted a friend about meeting for coffee near my neighborhood. I even updated my design business's online calendar with in-person client meetings, scheduled at my home office. Each digital communication felt like dangling myself as bait, even knowing I would be nowhere near the trap when it sprung. The weekend passed with excruciating slowness. I occupied myself helping the FBI technicians craft increasingly specific communications about my planned return. By Monday, the fictional narrative of my movements was detailed enough to be convincing. I would arrive at my house at 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday after stopping for takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. The stage is set, Agent Keller confirmed Monday evening. Teams will move into position tomorrow morning. By this time tomorrow night, we should have Blackwood and any associates who take the bait. I nodded, attempting to project a confidence I didn't feel. Despite their assurances, a persistent voice in my mind whispered that these people had outsmarted authorities before. What if tomorrow was no different? Tuesday unfolded with methodical precision. Hourly updates from the tactical team confirmed. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Surveillance equipment had been installed throughout my neighborhood. Agents posing as utility workers had established a perimeter. My final heading home soon text had been sent at 5:45 p.m. Now we waited. Agent Keller remained in constant communication with the field team, providing updates as they came in. At 6:37 p.m., surveillance detected a black sedan making multiple passes through my neighborhood. At 7:12 p.m., a woman matching Vanessa Blackwood's description was observed entering the coffee shop across from my house. At 7:25 p.m., the sedan returned, parking 2 blocks away. "They're taking the bait," Agent Clayton confirmed, monitoring the feeds on his laptop. At 7:42 p.m., 12 minutes after I was supposedly due home, Agent Keller received a call that made her expression tighten. "They've detected multiple heat signatures approaching your property from different directions," she informed me after hanging up. "At least 3 individuals, moving with tactical precision." My pulse quickened. Is that normal? I thought Vanessa, worked alone or with just one partner. "It's not consistent with her previous patterns," Agent Keller admitted, "but it could indicate this operation is more significant to them than we realized." The radio crackled with updates as the subjects continued their approach. One accessed my backyard through a neighbor's property. Another positioned themselves near the front entrance. The third remained in a vehicle with the engine running, a potential getaway driver. At 8:15 p.m., the operation exploded into action. Subject 1 has breached the rear entrance, the tactical team leader reported. Subject 2 is approaching the front, preparing to engage. Agent Keller leaned toward the radio. "Execute with caution. Remember, we need them alive for questioning." What followed was a chaotic series of radio transmissions that painted a fragmented picture of the raid. Agents swarmed the property from concealed positions. Commands to surrender were issued. Subject 2, later identified as Kevin Mercer, fake Ethan, attempted to flee but was apprehended on the front lawn. Subject 1, confirmed to be Vanessa Blackwood, barricaded herself in my home office, resulting in a 15-minute standoff, before tactical officers breached the room and took her into custody. The driver of the sedan attempted to escape but was stopped by a roadblock 2 blocks away. When apprehended, he was identified as Edward Nolan, Thomas's financial advisor, who had helped orchestrate the fraudulent transfer attempt. "We got them," Agent Keller announced, a rare smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "All 3 in custody, no injuries to any personnel." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a new anxiety. What now? Is it over? "The immediate threat is contained," she confirmed. "But the investigation continues. These 3, along with your husband, are significant players, but we believe the network extends further. We'll need your continued cooperation as we build our case." "Of course," I agreed. "Whatever you need." What I needed was to begin rebuilding my life, a prospect both liberating and terrifying. Everything I had built, every certainty I had cherished, had been systematically undermined. Where would I even start? The answer came the following morning, when Agent Keller arrived with unexpected news. "We've been analyzing the evidence seized from Blackwood and Mercer," she began. "Among other things, we found comprehensive dossiers on potential targets, people they were evaluating for future operations." She placed a folder in front of me. Inside was a detailed profile of Lauren Williams, my friend whose cabin I had fled to. "They were planning to target her next," Agent Keller explained. "Using the trust they'd established through the fake Ethan, they would have enacted a similar scheme to what they attempted with you." I stared at the document, noting the meticulous details, Lauren's assets, vulnerabilities, social connections, everything a predator would need to destroy her life. "There are dozens more files like this," Agent Keller continued. "People across multiple states, all carefully selected for their wealth, social isolation, or other exploitable vulnerabilities. A thought began forming in my mind. Do you have profiles of everyone they've already victimized, the ones who didn't catch on in time? We're compiling that information now. Why? Because I want to help them, I said, the purpose crystallizing as I spoke. Not just with the investigation, but afterward. These people have lost everything. Money, security, trust. I know exactly what that feels like, and I know how overwhelming it is to try to rebuild. Agent Keller considered this. What exactly are you proposing? A support network, I explained. Legal resources, financial counseling, therapy, whatever they need to reclaim their lives. I have my design business, connections in various industries. I can help coordinate services, maybe even establish a formal organization for victims of this type of fraud. For the first time in our interactions, Agent Keller looked genuinely impressed. That's actually a remarkable idea, Mrs. Mitchell. It could provide essential support to victims while also potentially yielding additional evidence as people come forward. Over the next several days, as the investigation progressed and my security detail was gradually reduced, I began formulating a concrete plan. I contacted Harriet Winters, the divorce attorney who had helped me protect my assets, and she eagerly agreed to assemble a network of legal professionals willing to assist victims. My business partner, Melissa, after being briefed on a sanitized version of events, offered our design studio as a temporary headquarters for the nascent organization. We hired a trauma-informed therapist as our first staff member and began developing protocols for intake and assessment. 2 weeks after the arrests, I was finally cleared to return to my home. Agent Keller accompanied me, understanding the psychological significance of the moment. The house looked exactly as I remembered, yet felt entirely foreign, like a museum exhibit of my former life. I walked through each room, confronting memories, both genuine and tainted. In the kitchen where Thomas and Allison Vanessa had plotted against me. The living room where they'd embraced. The bedroom where Thomas had slept beside me while systematically betraying everything our marriage represented. I paused at the spot where I'd removed the smoke detector camera, remembering the tennis bracelet I'd found hidden there, a token of apparent affection from a man who had been planning my destruction. You don't have to stay here, Agent Keller said quietly. No one would blame you for selling it and starting fresh elsewhere. I considered this, running my hand along the quartz countertop we'd installed 3 years earlier. No, I finally decided. I won't let them take this from me, too. This house was my dream before it became a crime scene. I can reclaim it. That's very resilient of you, I smiled thinly. Not resilience, defiance. There's a difference. Later that evening, alone in the house for the first time since everything had imploded, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and began drafting the mission statement for what would become the Phoenix Network, an organization dedicated to helping victims of intimate fraud rebuild their lives from the ashes of betrayal. The preliminary hearings for Thomas, Vanessa, Kevin, and Edward began the following week. Each had been charged with multiple federal offenses, and prosecutors were confident in securing significant prison sentences for all 4. The evidence from my cameras, combined with the materials seized during the arrests and Thomas's partial cooperation, had created an airtight case. Attended the first hearing, sitting silently in the back of the courtroom as Thomas was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked diminished, his confident posture replaced by the slumped shoulders of a man facing decades in prison. When he spotted me, a complex emotion crossed his face. Shame, perhaps, or regret. I held his gaze steadily until he looked away. Outside, the courthouse. I gave a brief statement to the press about the Phoenix Network, inviting other victims to come forward. By that evening, my email was flooded with messages from people across the country who recognized their own experiences in my story. 3 months after installing those first hidden cameras, my life bore little resemblance to what it had been. Before. My marriage was over, my sense of security permanently altered. But in its place was something unexpected, a newfound purpose, a community of survivors, and a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The hidden cameras that had revealed my husband's betrayal had ultimately illuminated a path forward. Not just for me, but for countless others whose trust had been similarly violated. It wasn't the life I had planned, but as I reviewed applications for the Phoenix Network's first round of support grants, I realized it might ultimately be more meaningful than the one that had been taken from me. Thomas's girlfriend had moved into our house, never suspecting I'd installed hidden cameras. Those cameras had revealed more than just an affair. They had exposed an entire criminal network and ultimately sparked a movement to help others reclaim their lives after devastating betrayal. Sometimes the most important revelations come through the most painful discoveries. And sometimes, the end of one story is simply the necessary beginning of another. 1 year later, the Phoenix Network headquarters bustled with activity as I unlocked the front door. What had begun as a makeshift operation in my design studio had evolved into a proper organization with 6 full-time staff members, occupying a renovated Victorian in downtown Portland. The morning sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the reception area where our intake coordinator, Zoe, was already setting up for the day. "Morning, Rebecca," she greeted me. "The Anderson file is on. Your desk and Senator Wilson's office called. They want to discuss your testimony for next month's committee hearing." I nodded, hanging my coat on the antique rack by the door. "Thanks. Any word from Jessica?" She emailed last night. "First month at her new job is going well. She sent pictures of her new apartment." I smiled, genuinely pleased. Jessica Lawson had been one of our first clients. A pharmaceutical executive whose fiancé had systematically drained her accounts before disappearing 3 days before their wedding. When she'd come to us, she'd been on the verge of bankruptcy and suicide. Now, a year later, she had rebuilt her career and was cautiously beginning to trust again. These success stories fueled our work, providing tangible proof that recovery was possible even from the most devastating betrayals. In my office, I reviewed the day's schedule, 2 client consultations, a conference call with our emerging West Coast chapters, and final preparations for tomorrow's fundraising gala. The Phoenix Network had expanded faster than any of us had anticipated, with satellite offices now operating in Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver. Our client list had grown to over 300 individuals, all victims of what we now formally termed intimate fraud, systematic deception, and exploitation by romantic partners. The Anderson case would be challenging, a retired widower who had lost his life savings to a woman he'd met through a church group. She'd disappeared after 18 months, leaving him with nothing but debt and shame. His adult children had reached out to us, desperate to help their father reclaim some semblance of his former life. I made notes on potential resources for him: legal aid to address the debt, therapy options specialized in trauma and betrayal, and our peer support network for seniors, when my office phone rang. "Rebecca Mitchell," I answered. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Warden Campbell from Northeast Correctional Facility." My grip tightened involuntarily on the receiver. Northeast was where Thomas was serving his 15-year sentence. "I'm calling regarding Thomas Mitchell. There's been an incident." My heart stuttered. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the criminal charges and the year of rebuilding, some small part of me still reacted to news of Thomas with emotional intensity. "What kind of incident?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Mr. Mitchell was assaulted by another inmate yesterday evening. He's currently in the prison infirmary with serious injuries. As his still legal next of kin, you're listed as his emergency contact." The divorce wasn't final, a complicated process given the ongoing criminal proceedings and financial investigations. On paper, I remained Thomas's wife, though in reality, that relationship had ended the moment I discovered his betrayal. "I understand," I said. "What does this mean, practically speaking?" Do you need decisions from me? Not at this time. His condition is stable, though serious. He's requested to see you. I almost laughed at the audacity. After everything he'd done, Thomas still believed he had the right to make demands of me. I'm afraid that won't be possible, I replied coolly. Please update my contact information to direct any further medical decisions to his attorney. I'm sending over the paperwork to remove myself as his emergency contact. Of course. There's one more thing, Ms. Mitchell. Before the assault, Mr. Mitchell had requested a meeting with FBI agent Keller. He claimed to have additional information about the network he was involved with, information he hadn't previously disclosed. This caught my attention. While Thomas had cooperated enough to secure a reduced sentence, investigators had always suspected he was withholding details, particularly about the network's higher-level operations. Did he meet with her? The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow. Given his condition, that's obviously been postponed. After hanging up, I sat motionless, processing this new development. If Thomas was finally willing to reveal more about the network, it could potentially help dozens of additional victims, people we hadn't yet identified, whose lives were still being systematically dismantled by criminals like Vanessa Blackwood and Kevin Mercer. I picked up the phone again and dialed Agent Keller's direct line. I just heard about Thomas, I said when she answered, and about his request to meet with you. News travels fast, she remarked. I was going to call you this afternoon. Do you think he's actually going to reveal something substantial? Agent Keller paused. Possibly. The assault wasn't random. Our intelligence suggests it was orchestrated by someone connected to the network. Thomas may have been preparing to expose someone significant, and they attempted to silence him. Is he secure now? We've arranged for isolated custody and additional security. Once he's medically stable, we'll proceed with the interview. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming in my mind. Would my presence make a difference? Would he be more likely to cooperate fully if I were there? Now it was Agent Keller's turn to be silent for a moment. Possibly, she admitted. He's been asking about you during his incarceration, how you're doing, if you've moved on. Despite everything, he seems to still care about your opinion of him. I closed my eyes, considering the implications. The thought of facing Thomas again, sitting across from the man who had so meticulously betrayed me, made my stomach clench. Yet, if it could help identify and protect other potential victims, wasn't that worth my temporary discomfort? I'll do it, I decided. But I have conditions. I won't be alone with him, and I want everything he says on record. Of course, I'll make the arrangements and let you know when he's cleared for visitors. After hanging up, I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden we'd planted behind the Victorian, phoenix flowers and resilience roses, symbolic plantings that our clients contributed to as part of their healing journey. Each bloom represented someone reclaiming their life after devastating betrayal. The unexpected call had disrupted my carefully constructed equilibrium. For months, I'd focused exclusively on moving forward, building the Phoenix network, finalizing the divorce, selling the house that contained too many tainted memories. I'd replaced pain with purpose, finding meaning in helping others navigate the aftermath of betrayal. Now Thomas's request threatened to pull me backward, reopening wounds that had only recently begun to truly heal. Everything okay? Melissa asked from the doorway. My business partner had become my right hand in the Phoenix network, bringing her organizational skills and entrepreneurial mindset to our rapidly growing operation. Thomas was attacked in prison, I replied, turning to face her. He's asking to see me. Melissa's expression shifted to concern. And you're considering it? He's apparently ready to reveal more about the network, information that could help identify other victims or prevent future crimes. Agent Keller thinks my presence might encourage his full cooperation. That's not your responsibility, Beck, Melissa reminded me gently. You've already done more than anyone could reasonably expect, building this entire organization from your trauma. You don't owe him your presence. I know, I agreed. But I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for whoever might be protected by whatever information he provides. 2 days later, I found myself being processed through security at Northeast Correctional Facility, Agent Keller at my side. Thomas had been transferred from the infirmary to the prison's medical wing, his condition upgraded to stable but still requiring monitoring. Remember, Agent Keller briefed me as we walked the sterile corridor, you're here as a potential motivating factor for his cooperation, not as his wife or support person. You don't need to engage with him emotionally. If at any point you want to leave, just say the word. I nodded, straightening my shoulders as we approached the guarded door to the medical wing. I had dressed carefully for this encounter, a tailored charcoal suit that projected confidence and professional distance, nothing that would remind Thomas of our shared past. He looked smaller somehow, propped up in the hospital bed with monitoring, equipment beeping steadily beside him. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, with a cast on his left arm. When he saw me enter behind Agent Keller, his uninjured eye widened in genuine surprise. "Rebecca," he breathed, "you actually came. I'm here because Agent Keller believes you have information that could help protect other people from experiencing what I went through," I replied evenly. "Nothing more." Thomas nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "You look good. Healthy." Ignored the personal observation. "Agent Keller says you're finally ready to reveal more about the network. What changed?" He seemed momentarily disappointed by my businesslike approach, but rallied. "Getting beaten half to death tends to clarify one's priorities," he said with a ghost of his old sardonic humor. "They tried to kill me, Beck, because I was getting tired of looking over my shoulder, even in here." "Who's they?" Agent Keller interjected, taking a seat beside his bed and placing a recording device on the side table. "I need specific names." "Thomas." He glanced at the recorder, then back at me. I remained standing, arms crossed, expression neutral. Whatever he was looking for, forgiveness, emotional connection, validation, he wouldn't find it here. "Marcus Shepard," he finally said. "He runs the entire Eastern operation. Everything I did, everything Vanessa and Kevin did, was ultimately under his direction." Agent Keller leaned forward. "The investment banker? From Greenwich?" Thomas nodded. "His legitimate business is the perfect cover and provides access to potential targets. He identifies wealthy individuals with exploitable vulnerabilities, then assigns teams to infiltrate their lives." For the next hour, Thomas detailed a criminal enterprise far more extensive than anything the FBI had previously documented. Marcus, Shepard oversaw operations across 6 states, employing dozens of operatives like Vanessa and Kevin in various configurations, sometimes as romantic partners of the targets, sometimes as trusted friends or advisors. Their methodology was consistent: identify, infiltrate, isolate, and extract, leaving their victims financially and emotionally devastated. Shepard maintains complete separation from the actual operations, Thomas explained. Everything is compartmentalized. Most field operatives never meet him directly. Communication happens through designated intermediaries. "Like you?" I asked, speaking for the first time since the interview began. Thomas met my gaze. "Yes. I was a Level 2 coordinator for the Pacific Northwest region. I received directives from above and translated them into actionable plans for the field teams, including the plan to marry me, build a life with me, and then destroy me." I kept my tone clinically detached, as if discussing a case study rather than my own life. He had the decency to look away. "No, that was different." "Different how?" Thomas sighed, shifting uncomfortably in the hospital bed. "Our marriage wasn't originally part of any operation. It was real, Rebecca. For the first 8 years, it was completely real." I felt Agent Keller watching me carefully, gauging my reaction. I maintained my composed exterior, though internally, Emotions churned at this confirmation of what she had suggested earlier, that the beginning of our relationship had been genuine. "What changed?" I asked. "I made some bad investments, accumulated gambling debts I couldn't cover. Shepard's people approached me. They'd identified me as someone with access to upper-middle-class professional circles, the perfect hunting ground. For their targets, they offered to clear my debts in exchange for my participation. And you agreed," I stated flatly. "You sold your integrity, your marriage, your entire life." "I told myself it was just information gathering at first," he continued, a hint of desperation entering his voice. "Identifying potential targets, making introductions. I never intended to target your own wife?" I finished for him. "And yet here we are." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "That was Shepard's idea. After I'd been working with them for about 3 years, he decided you would make an ideal target. Successful business, trusting nature, substantial assets. When I objected, he made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. By then, I knew too much about the operation. It was to participate or—" He trailed off. "Or what? They'd kill you?" I challenged myself. "Like they tried to do this week?" "Yes," he admitted quietly. "Or worse, they'd kill you and make it look like I did it. Either way, I was trapped." Agent Keller redirected the conversation to operational details. Names, locations, methodologies. Thomas provided information about shell companies, money laundering techniques, and the network's sophisticated digital infrastructure. The picture that emerged was of a criminal enterprise generating tens of millions annually through systematic fraud. As the interview progressed, I found myself studying Thomas, not as my husband or even my betrayer, but as a case study in moral compromise. Each decision he'd made, each boundary he'd crossed, had led him incrementally toward the unthinkable. It was a pattern I'd seen repeatedly in the cases that came through the Phoenix network. The gradual erosion of ethical boundaries until actions once considered unthinkable became justifiable. After nearly 3 hours, Agent Keller declared the fee. "Interview complete for the day, promising to return tomorrow for additional details." "Rebecca," Thomas called as we prepared to leave. "Can I have a moment? Just a minute, please?" I looked to Agent Keller, who nodded. "I'll be right outside the door," she said, collecting her recorder and notes. When we were alone, Thomas struggled to sit up straighter. "I know it doesn't change anything," he began. "But I need you to know that I really did love you. Even during the worst of it, even when I was actively betraying you, part of me still loved you." I regarded him steadily. "That's worse, Thomas. If you never loved me, this would just be a calculated crime. But loving me and still being willing to destroy me? That's a deeper kind of betrayal." "I know," he whispered. "I've had a lot of time to think about it here. About how I became someone capable of hurting the one person who truly believed in me." I moved toward the door, then paused. The Phoenix Network has helped hundreds of people rebuild after experiences like mine. People who lost everything to someone they trusted implicitly. Your testimony today might help prevent others from experiencing that kind of betrayal. It doesn't absolve you, but it's something. His uninjured eye filled with tears. "I'm proud of you for what that's worth. Building something meaningful from the wreckage I created." "It wasn't for you," I said simply. "It was never about you. It was about refusing to let what you did define the rest of my life." With that, I walked out, closing the door on Thomas and symbolically on the last unresolved aspect of our shared history. Agent Keller was waiting in the corridor. "You okay?" I considered the question seriously. "Yes," I realized. "I actually am." The truth was, seeing Thomas again, broken, diminished, grasping for some kind of redemption, had confirmed what I'd already known intellectually but needed to feel emotionally. I had moved beyond him. Rebecca, who had installed those hidden cameras a year ago, had been fighting to save her marriage, her security, and her vision of the future. Rebecca, walking out of Northeast Correctional Facility, had created something entirely new from the ashes of that former life. As we drove back toward Portland, Agent Keller outlined the next steps in building the case against Marcus Shepard. Thomas's testimony is a start, but we'll need corroboration. The information about Shepard's digital infrastructure is particularly valuable. Our cyber team can use that to trace financial transactions, possibly identifying additional victims. I listened attentively, already mentally cataloging how the Phoenix network could support these newly identified victims. Perhaps a specialized task force, working directly with the FBI to provide immediate intervention. My phone chimed with a text from Melissa. Anderson intake complete. Tough case but promising. Also, the senator confirmed for the gala tomorrow. We're ready when you are. Life continued. Work continued. The mission continued. When Agent Keller dropped me at the Phoenix Network headquarters, the afternoon support group was just concluding. Members filtered out through the front door. Men and women of various ages and backgrounds, united by the common experience of profound betrayal and the determination to rebuild. A woman I recognized as a recent client spotted me and approached hesitantly. Ms. Mitchell? I just wanted to say thank you. For the first time since everything happened, I actually feel hopeful about the future. I smiled, recognizing my own journey in her words. That's how it starts, I told her. Hope is the first step. Everything else follows. As she walked away, I glanced up at the sign above our entrance. A phoenix rising from stylized flames, wings spread wide. Below it, our motto, from ashes to advocacy. The hidden cameras that had revealed my husband's betrayal had ultimately revealed something far more significant. My own capacity for resilience, for transformation, for creating meaning from devastation. What had begun as a desperate attempt to protect myself had evolved into a mission to protect others, to transform the landscape of recovery for victims of intimate fraud. I climbed the steps to our headquarters, ready to continue that work. Not, despite what had happened to me, but because of it. The Phoenix Network's annual gala transformed the Portland Art Museum's Grand Hall into a sea of elegant attire and meaningful conversation. As founder and executive director, I circulated among donors, survivors, and advocates, sharing our mission and the impact of our first full year of operation. The event had drawn over 300 attendees, including 2 state senators and a congressman who had recently introduced legislation specifically addressing intimate fraud. Ms. Mitchell, Senator Wilson approached, champagne flute in hand. Congratulations on a remarkable achievement. From personal tragedy to national movement in just 18 months, it's extraordinary. Thank you, Senator. Though I'd prefer we lived in a world where organizations like ours weren't necessary, she nodded solemnly. Unfortunately, predators will always exist. What changes is how we respond to them, how we support their victims. That's where your work is truly revolutionary, creating a roadmap for recovery that simply didn't exist before. Her words echoed in my mind as I took the stage later that evening, looking out at the gathered crowd, many of whom had their own stories of betrayal and rebuilding. I felt a profound sense of purpose that had emerged from the darkest chapter of my life. When I installed hidden cameras in my home 18 months ago, I began. I was simply trying to confirm a suspicion about my husband's fidelity. I had no idea I was about to uncover a sophisticated criminal network, or that the evidence I gathered would eventually help federal authorities dismantle a multi-state fraud operation. The room was silent, attendees hanging on every word of a story that had become almost mythic in survivor circles. But the cameras revealed something else, something far more significant than criminal activity. They revealed the devastating impact of intimate betrayal, the disorientation, the self-doubt, the profound loss of security that comes with discovering that someone you trusted implicitly has been systematically deceiving you. I paused, making eye contact with several Phoenix Network clients seated throughout the room. In the aftermath, I discovered there were few resources specifically designed to address this unique form of trauma. Legal advice, financial guidance, emotional support, these existed in silos, requiring survivors to navigate complex systems while still reeling from betrayal. The Phoenix Network was born from that realization, the understanding that recovery requires a holistic approach, addressing practical concerns alongside emotional healing. As I outlined our accomplishments, 6 offices across 3 states, partnerships with law enforcement agencies, specialized support programs for various demographics, I marveled at how far we'd come. What had begun as my personal survival strategy had evolved into a lifeline for hundreds. But our work is just beginning, I continued. Next month, we launch our preventative education initiative, helping people recognize warning signs before devastation occurs. And tonight, I'm thrilled to announce the creation of the Phoenix Legal Defense Fund, providing representation to survivors who otherwise couldn't afford to fight for justice. The announcement triggered enthusiastic applause, particularly from the attorneys who had volunteered countless hours to our cause. Harriet Winters, my own divorce attorney who now headed our legal division, raised her glass in salute from her table near the front. After the speech, during the fundraising portion of the evening, I slipped away briefly to the museum's quiet balcony for a moment of reflection. The night sky stretched above the city lights, stars barely visible through Portland's perpetual cloud cover. Quite a triumph, a voice spoke behind me. I turned to find Agent Keller, Diana, as we now addressed each other outside of professional settings, approaching with 2 glasses of water. I was just thinking about how different everything is from that day in your office when you explained what Thomas and Vanessa were really involved in, I said, accepting the offered glass. You've created something remarkable, she observed. The Bureau is already adopting some of your protocols for victim support. Your impact extends far beyond the Phoenix Network itself. What about the Shepard case? I asked. Any developments? Diana nodded. The grand jury is meeting next week. Thomas's testimony, combined with the financial records we've obtained, presents a compelling case. Shepard's attorneys are already floating the possibility of a plea deal. Will he take it? Hard to say. Men like Shepard rarely believe consequences apply to them, even when the evidence is overwhelming. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city below. There's something else, Diana said finally. Something I wanted to tell. You in person rather than over the phone. The serious tone in her voice immediately put me on alert. What is it? Thomas was transferred to the prison hospital yesterday. His condition has deteriorated significantly. The doctors believe he suffered internal injuries from the assault that weren't immediately apparent. I absorbed this information, surprised by the complexity of emotions it triggered. Despite everything Thomas had done, despite the calculated betrayal and the lives he had helped destroy, some small part of me still remembered the man I had once loved. How serious is it? They're not optimistic, Diana said gently. The prison. Physician requested I inform you, given that you're still legally his next of kin. He's asking to see you again. I turned away, looking back over the cityscape. The last time I had seen Thomas, in the prison medical wing, I had felt closure, a sense of finally severing the emotional ties that had bound us. The thought of revisiting that scene, especially with Thomas potentially dying, threatened to reopen wounds that had finally healed. You don't owe him anything, Diana reminded me, echoing Melissa's words from before. Not your time, not your presence, not your forgiveness. I know, I said quietly, but this isn't about Thomas. It's about me. About being the person I want to be, not the person his betrayal could have made me. The next morning, as the gala's success still dominated conversation at Phoenix Network headquarters, I drove alone to the prison hospital. Unlike my previous visit, This time I came as neither investigator nor victim, but simply as a human being acknowledging the complicated reality of shared history. Thomas looked markedly worse than during our last encounter. His complexion gray, breathing, labored, multiple IV lines feeding into both arms. When the guard announced my presence, his eyes fluttered open with visible effort. "You came," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't think you would." "Neither did I admitted, taking the chair beside his bed. "The doctors say it's serious." He attempted a weak smile. "Terminal, actually. Ruptured spleen, internal bleeding they can't fully control. Turns out Shepard's enforcers are thorough." I didn't know how to respond to his matter-of-fact description of his own impending death. Despite everything, there was something profoundly sad about Thomas dying like this, alone in a prison hospital, his life's potential squandered on self-serving choices and criminal activities. "I saw you on the news," he continued with effort. "The Phoenix Network. It's remarkable. You've helped so many people." "That's the goal," I replied simply. "I keep thinking about the irony," Thomas murmured. "If I hadn't betrayed you, none of those people would have the help they're receiving now. My worst action inadvertently led to your greatest achievement." I shook my head. "Don't try to reframe this as some kind of backhanded gift, Thomas. What you did was unconscionable, regardless of what I built afterward." "I know," he conceded. "I'm not looking for absolution. I just wanted to see you one last time, to tell you something important." I waited, watching as he gathered his diminishing strength. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not just for the operation, for the fraud, for everything. For wasting what we had, for betraying your trust, for choosing self-preservation over basic human decency. You deserved so much better than what I became." The simple apology, devoid of excuses or qualifications, was perhaps the only thing Thomas could have said that might actually matter. Not because it erased the harm he'd caused, but because it acknowledged his complete responsibility for that harm. "Thank you for saying that," I replied quietly. We sat in silence for several minutes, the beeping of his monitors marking the passage of time. There was nothing more to say, really. No magical conversation that could rewrite our shared history or provide more perfect closure than I had already created for myself. As I prepared to leave, Thomas spoke once more, his voice even fainter than before. "They found your cameras, you know. After you left that night. Vanessa spotted the one in the kitchen first. We were so angry, so panicked. But even then, part of me admired your resourcefulness." "Resourcefulness born of necessity," I responded. "I hope no one ever has reason to be that resourceful again." He nodded weakly. "The work you're doing, it's important. Don't ever doubt that." 3 days later, Diana called to inform me that Thomas had died peacefully in his sleep. The news affected me less than I might have expected, perhaps because in all the ways that mattered, I had already processed the death of our relationship, the death of the future we had planned, the death of the man I thought I had married. At the Phoenix Network's morning meeting, I mentioned Thomas's passing briefly, acknowledging it as the final chapter in the personal story that had launched our organization. Then we turned our attention to the work at hand, the clients needing support, the educational programs being developed, the advocacy initiatives gaining momentum in state legislatures. That evening, I walked alone along the Willamette River, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. I reflected on the strange, painful journey that had led me here. From hidden cameras to hidden strengths, from devastation to determination, from victim to advocate. The cameras I had installed in a desperate attempt to protect myself had revealed not just a betrayal, but a pathway forward. Not just for me, but for hundreds of others navigating similar trauma. In exposing the darkest aspects of human deception, they had illuminated possibilities for healing and justice I could never have imagined. As darkness fell over Portland, I turned toward home, not the house I had shared with Thomas, which I had finally sold months earlier, but the small riverside apartment that represented my independent life. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new challenges, new opportunities to transform pain into purpose. The hidden cameras had served their purpose. Now it was time to face forward, eyes wide open, ready to see whatever came next. 5 years later, "Are you nervous?" Melissa asked, adjusting my blazer collar as we waited backstage. I laughed softly. After testifying before Congress 3 times? This should be easy by comparison. But the truth was, I did feel a flutter of anticipation. Speaking at the National Victims' Rights Conference as the keynote was a significant milestone, recognition that the Phoenix Network had moved from grassroots initiative to established institutions in the victim advocacy landscape. The ballroom of the Washington, D.C. hotel was packed with representatives from every corner of the justice system: prosecutors, victim advocates, law enforcement officials, legislators, and most importantly, survivors themselves. Our work has expanded dramatically over the past 5 years, with 15 offices nationwide and international partnerships developing in Canada, the UK, and Australia. 2 minutes, the event coordinator informed us, clipboard in hand. I took a deep breath, centering myself. The story I was about to share, my story, had been told many times in many venues, but never lost its power. Not because it was uniquely tragic, but because it represented a transformative possibility. That devastating betrayal could become the catalyst for meaningful change. As the conference chair introduced me, highlighting the Phoenix Network's accomplishments and the groundbreaking legislation we'd helped craft, I reflected on how far we'd come from those first desperate days when I'd installed hidden cameras in my home. Walking onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, I smiled at the supportive faces. Before me, many were colleagues who had become friends through our shared mission. Others were survivors whose recoveries I had witnessed firsthand. All were committed to the belief that trauma need not be the end of a person's story. "Thank you for that generous introduction," I began. 5 years ago, I stood in my kitchen installing what looked like an ordinary phone charger but was actually a hidden camera. I was terrified, confused, and desperately seeking confirmation of something I already knew in my heart: that my husband was betraying me. The room fell silent, attendees leaning forward slightly in their seats. What those cameras revealed was far more extensive than a simple affair. They uncovered a sophisticated criminal network specializing in what we now formally classify as intimate fraud, the systematic exploitation of trust within close relationships for financial gain. But they also revealed something equally important: the profound gap in services for victims of such crimes. I continued, outlining the evolution of the Phoenix Network from my personal response to trauma to the multifaceted organization it had become. Specialized programs for elderly victims, financial reconstruction services, trauma-informed therapy, legal advocacy, and preventative education, each component designed to address a different facet of recovery. But today, I want to focus on our newest initiative, I said, transitioning to the heart of my speech: the Phoenix Testimony Project. On the screen behind me, a series of photographs appeared: men and women of various ages and backgrounds, each staring directly into the camera with quiet dignity. "These are the faces of survival," I explained. Individuals who, like me, experienced profound betrayal by those they trusted most. For the past year, we've been documenting their stories, not just the crimes committed against them, but their journeys toward rebuilding. These testimonies now form the foundation of a groundbreaking educational program being implemented in colleges, community centers, and law enforcement training nationwide. As I outlined the preliminary results, increased awareness, improved law enforcement response, enhanced empathy from service providers, I felt a surge of pride in what we'd accomplished. The hidden cameras that had once been my desperate attempt at self-protection had ultimately catalyzed a movement that was changing how society understood and responded to intimate betrayal. After the speech and subsequent standing ovation, I participated in a panel discussion with prosecutors specializing in complex fraud cases, including Marcus Shepard's. His trial 3 years earlier had been a watershed moment for our cause, the first time a network orchestrator had been held accountable not just for financial crimes, but for the emotional devastation inflicted on victims. The 25-year sentence he received had sent ripples through similar operations across the country. Combined with the specialized task forces now dedicated to identifying and disrupting such networks, the landscape for criminals like Vanessa Blackwood and Kevin Mercer had become significantly more hostile. Following the panel, I returned to my hotel suite to prepare for an evening reception. As I changed from my day suit into cocktail attire, my phone rang with a familiar name on the screen. Diana Keller, now the special agent in charge of the FBI's Vulnerable Victim Protection Unit, a division she had helped create based partly on insights from the Phoenix Network's cases. "Rebecca," she greeted me warmly. "Caught your speech on the live stream. Powerful as always." "Thanks, Diana. Sorry you couldn't be here in person. That's actually why I'm calling. We've just closed a case I think you'll find interesting, directly connected to the Shepard network, but operating independently since his arrest." My interest piqued immediately. "Go on?" "A couple in Seattle, James and Catherine Foster, who targeted wealthy divorcees through support groups and dating sites. They've been running this operation for at least 7 years, predating even your case." "The connection to Shepard?" "James Foster was on Shepard's payroll as a talent scout, identifying and recruiting potential operatives who demonstrated the necessary attributes for this kind of work. Sociopathy, charm, and greed," I supplied, familiar with the profile after years of studying these networks. "Exactly. What makes this case particularly significant is the documentation we recovered. Foster kept meticulous records of the network's methodology, the psychological profiling of potential victims, the customized approaches tailored to specific vulnerabilities, the incremental trust-building techniques." I sat on the edge of the bed, absorbing this information. That kind of documentation would be invaluable for our prevention programs. Understanding precisely how they identify and groom targets could help us develop much more effective warning systems. "My thoughts exactly," Diana confirmed. "Once the case is fully processed, I'd like to bring you in as a consultant. This material could transform your educational initiatives." After we disconnected, I found myself staring at my reflection in the hotel mirror, struck by the strange symmetry of this development. What had begun with hidden cameras uncovering one operation was evolving into a comprehensive understanding of how these networks functioned at a systemic level. The evening reception brought together key stakeholders in the victim advocacy community, nonprofit, leaders, major donors, policymakers, and survivors who had become advocates themselves. Moving through the elegant gathering, I engaged in conversations about upcoming legislative priorities and the expansion of services for underserved populations. "Ms. Mitchell," a voice called as I refreshed my sparkling water at the bar. I turned to find a tall woman in her 60s approaching with determined purpose. "Margaret Winters. My husband Gordon was one of your early clients in Denver." I searched my memory and recalled the case. A retired surgeon whose much younger wife had systematically emptied their accounts before disappearing with nearly $2 million. "Of course, Mrs. Winters. How is Gordon doing?" Her face softened. "Much better. The financial counseling your organization provided was instrumental in salvaging our retirement. But that's not why I wanted to speak with you." She reached into her evening bag and removed a check, pressing it into my hand. When I glanced down, the amount, $500,000, momentarily rendered me speechless. "Gordon and I have been blessed with the ability to rebuild our finances," she explained. "Others aren't so fortunate. This donation is specifically for your emergency relocation program, helping victims who need to establish immediate financial independence. The relocation program had been one of our most impactful initiatives, providing temporary housing, employment assistance, and financial bridges for survivors fleeing exploitative relationships. It was also perpetually underfunded given the intensive resources required. "This is incredibly generous," I managed, genuinely moved. "You'll help dozens of families with this gift." Margaret squeezed my hand. When Gordon was at his lowest point, convinced his life was effectively over at 73, your organization provided more than practical assistance. You restored his dignity, his sense of agency. That's something no amount of money can adequately repay. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the reception venue's balcony, gazing out at the illuminated monuments of Washington, D.C. The journey from that desperate night in my kitchen to this moment had been extraordinary by any measure. Traversing personal devastation, criminal investigations, institutional development, and eventually, systemic change. "Penny, for your thoughts," a voice interrupted my reflection. I turned to find Congressman Jason Richardson, one of our strongest legislative allies and the primary sponsor of the Intimate Fraud Classification Act that had recently passed the House. "Just contemplating the strange path that led me here," I admitted. 5 years ago, I was installing hidden cameras to catch my cheating husband. Now I'm advising Congress on specialized fraud statutes. He chuckled, leaning against the balcony railing. "The most effective advocates are often those with direct experience. Your testimony during the committee hearings was compelling precisely because you lived it. The emotional manipulation, the calculated betrayal, the systematic exploitation of trust. The legislation you're championing will make a tremendous difference," I noted. "Creating a specific classification for intimate fraud acknowledges the unique harm of these crimes." "It's a start," he agreed. "Though we both know legal remedies can only address part of the damage." This was a fundamental truth we had discovered through the Phoenix Network's work. While legal accountability was essential, the deeper wounds required different healing, rebuilding trust, restoring self-confidence, reclaiming personal agency. Our most effective programs addressed both the practical and emotional dimensions of recovery. Returning to my hotel room that night, I opened my laptop to find an email from Zoe, our original intake coordinator, who now directed our national training program. The subject line read simply, "You should see this." The attached video showed a Phoenix Network client named Elaine participating in a community theater production, radiant on stage, confidently delivering her lines. When she had first come to us 18 months earlier, she had been so traumatized by her experience that she could barely speak above a whisper, let alone perform in public. These moments of transformation sustained our work through its inevitable challenges and frustrations. Each survivor who reclaimed joy, confidence, or purpose represented a victory over those who had sought to diminish them. My phone chimed with a text from Brian, the architectural historian I had been dating for the past year. We had met at a museum fundraiser, connected over shared interests entirely unrelated to my work, and developed a relationship characterized by mutual respect and transparent communication. "Caught your speech online. Brilliant as always. Can't wait to hear all about it when you're back." The relationship was still evolving, deliberately paced by mutual agreement. My experience had taught me the value of thorough vetting, of establishing trust incrementally rather than plunging headlong into vulnerability. Brian had demonstrated remarkable patience with this process, understanding its necessity without taking it personally. Whether our relationship would develop into something permanent remained to be seen, but the simple fact that I could contemplate such a possibility reflected profound healing. The cameras that had revealed Thomas's betrayal had initially shattered my capacity for trust, not just in him, but in my own judgment. Rebuilding that capacity had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of my recovery. The following morning brought the conference's final sessions, including a workshop I led on implementing trauma-informed practices in legal advocacy. As survivors and professionals engaged with the material, sharing insights from their own experiences, I felt the powerful synergy that emerged when personal trauma was channeled into collective action. During the lunch break, I received an unexpected call from Harriet Winters, who had transitioned from her private practice to become the Phoenix Network's full-time legal director 3 years earlier. "Rebecca, you need to hear this directly," she began without preamble. "Vanessa Blackwood is being released next month." My stomach tightened. Despite her relatively minor role compared to figures like Shepard, Vanessa had received a substantial sentence due to her prior activities and her attempt to flee justice. Her early release was unexpected. On what grounds? "Cooperation with ongoing investigations," Harriet explained. "Apparently, she's provided substantial assistance in cases we weren't even aware of, international connections, money laundering operations, the works." I processed this information, surprised by my own muted reaction. 5 years ago, news of Vanessa's release would have triggered immediate anxiety, perhaps even fear. Now, it registered primarily as a development to be monitored rather than a personal threat. "Has she made any statements regarding her plans after release?" I asked. "She'll be under strict supervision, required to maintain distance from all known victims, including you." But her attorney indicated she's interested in making some kind of statement to the Phoenix Network, possibly an apology, possibly something else entirely. I considered this unexpected twist. "Let me think about it. Any communication would need to happen under carefully controlled circumstances, with clear boundaries established in advance." After hanging up, I returned to the conference sessions, compartmentalizing this new information to focus on the work at hand. The ability to separate personal history from professional responsibilities had been essential in building the Phoenix Network, allowing me to transform my experience into expertise without being defined by victimhood. That evening, as I prepared to return to Portland, I received a final call from Diana with additional details about the Foster case in Seattle. "There's another angle I didn't mention yesterday," she began. "Foster's records included profiles of potential targets they never got around to victimizing. Your name was in those files, Rebecca, from before you met Thomas." I froze in the middle of packing. "What?" "The profile dates from 14 years ago, when you were first establishing your design business. You were flagged as a promising target, successful entrepreneur, limited family connections locally, substantial growth potential. The implications were staggering." "Are you saying I was identified by this network before I ever met Thomas? That our entire relationship might have been—" "We don't have evidence supporting that level of premeditation," Diana clarified quickly. "The profile exists, but there's no documentation connecting it directly to Thomas's recruitment. It's entirely possible you were simply on a list of potential targets that was never activated. Yet the possibility that my 12-year marriage had been orchestrated from the beginning, that I had been selected, targeted, and manipulated through what I had believed was an authentic relationship, sent a chill through me unlike anything I'd experienced in years. On the flight home, I found myself revisiting memories I had long since processed and filed away. The chance meeting with Thomas at a gallery opening, his persistent interest despite my initial hesitation, the seemingly perfect alignment of our goals and values. Has it all been calculated? Had there ever been a genuine connection, or had I built my marriage on a foundation of sophisticated manipulation? Touching down in Portland, I was greeted by a small welcome committee, Melissa and several other Phoenix Network staff members who had tracked my flight and came to surprise me with news of their own. "We received confirmation while you were in the air," Melissa announced excitedly as we walked to the parking garage. "The Sanderson Foundation grant came through. Full funding for the national expansion of the Testimony Project." The substantial grant we'd been pursuing for months would enable us to document hundreds of additional survivor stories and implement the educational program in schools, community organizations, and professional training programs across the country. "That's fantastic," I replied, genuinely pleased despite my preoccupation with Diana's revelation. The timing couldn't be better with the new legislation gaining momentum. Back at my riverside apartment, I settled into my favorite chair overlooking the water, finally allowing myself to fully process Diana's information. If I had indeed been profiled by this network before meeting Thomas, what did that mean for the narrative I had constructed about my experience? Had I been wrong to believe that at least our early years together had been genuine? After sitting with this uncomfortable question for some time, I reached a realization that brought unexpected peace. It ultimately didn't matter. Regardless of when or how Thomas had entered my life, regardless of whether any part of our relationship had been authentic, the outcome remained the same. I had discovered the deception, protected myself from financial ruin, and transformed the experience into a mission that had helped thousands of others. The hidden cameras I had installed had revealed far more than Thomas's betrayal. They had revealed my resilience, my capacity to trust my instincts even when doing so was painful, my ability to create meaning from suffering. These truths stood independent of Thomas's timeline or motivations. The next morning, I arrived at Phoenix Network headquarters to find our executive team gathered in the conference room, reviewing plans for implementing the newly funded testimony project. As I joined them, contributing ideas for reaching underserved communities and measuring program effectiveness, I felt a renewed appreciation for the organization we had built together. What had begun as my personal response to trauma had evolved into a collaborative enterprise involving dozens of dedicated professionals, hundreds of volunteers, and thousands of survivors. The Phoenix Network's impact extended far beyond anything I could have accomplished alone, a testament to the power of transforming individual pain into collective action. That afternoon, I taught a workshop for new clients on financial reconstruction after intimate fraud. Looking at the faces around the table, men and women at various stages of recovery, all grappling with the aftermath of profound betrayal, I recognized the same journey I had traveled. The path forward isn't about forgetting what happened, I told them as the session concluded. It's about integrating it into your story without allowing it to define that story. The people who betrayed you saw you as a means to an end, a target, a resource to be exploited. Your recovery begins when you reclaim your identity as the protagonist of your own life. Later, walking along the riverfront path that had become my daily ritual, I reflected on this principle in relation to my own evolving narrative. The cameras that had captured Thomas and Vanessa plotting against me had also, inadvertently, captured the beginning of my transformation. In exposing their deception, I had discovered truths about myself that might otherwise have remained hidden, strengths, capabilities, and purpose I might never have recognized. As the sun set over the Willamette River, casting long reflections across the water, I smiled at the paradoxical journey that had brought me here. Hidden cameras had revealed hidden capacities. Betrayal had illuminated the power of authentic connection. Loss had ultimately led to creation. Whatever complications Vanessa's release might bring, whatever questions remained about Thomas's initial motivations, I faced the future with hard-earned clarity. The cameras I had installed years ago had served their purpose, not just in exposing a criminal conspiracy, but in revealing the path that would ultimately lead to renewal, purpose, and unexpected joy. The story that had begun with secret surveillance had transformed into a public mission. The pain that had once seemed insurmountable had become the foundation for helping others navigate similar terrain. The trust that had been so profoundly violated had been rebuilt, not with naive optimism, but with wisdom, boundaries, and discernment. As darkness fell over Portland, I turned toward home, carrying with me the certainty that had emerged from uncertainty, the strength that had developed through vulnerability, and the purpose that had arisen from betrayal. The hidden cameras had revealed far more than I had ever anticipated, not just the darkness of deception, but the remarkable human capacity to transform trauma into meaning, loss into legacy, and endings into new beginnings. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.